Fallen Angels, Disc 6.
It rained for 7 days straight. We sat in the rain for 7 days straight. The mud oozed up into our boots, into our clothes, into our skins. There wasn't any way to get dry. There was talk about us standing down in Okinawa, but nobody took it seriously. There was a lot of talk about how well the other units in the outfit were doing, but the guys in the squad seemed a little different, tired. They seemed really tired. For the first 5 days after I got back, I didn't get to talk to Dongan. He nodded toward me once or twice, and that was it. I got an M16 and a grenade launcher from the armorer and found out that we had to carry more ammunition than I thought we would. Gerhardt came around and talked to us a couple of times, but Dongan stayed away. Johnson was getting a thing about him. I went over and talked to Johnson. I wanted to find out more about Dongan, but Johnson wouldn't deal with it. He asked me what I thought about Brew. I liked him, I said. "He probably back home now," he said. "Brew?" "Yeah." There was something about the way Johnson looked at me. I looked at Lobel and he shook his head. "Probably back home," I said. When Johnson went to chow, I asked Lobel what the hell was going on with him about Brew. "He's just not accepting the idea that he's dead," Lobel said. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you ask too many questions," Lobel said. That's what was going on. The questions kept coming and nobody wanted to deal with them. Johnson didn't want to deal with Brew being dead, and Lobel didn't want to deal with Johnson. Maybe I did ask too many questions. The first day the weather lifted a little, a chopper came in with a priest. Pee-wee had made a checkerboard out of some leaves he wove together. He was good at that kind of thing. We played checkers day and night. We were playing checkers when the Huey came in with the chaplain. The chaplain was Catholic, and the Catholic guys had a mass or something. Then he came around to the rest of us. He didn't look like a chaplain. What he looked like was a middleweight who fought preliminaries in Atlantic City. His name was Father Centora. "Sometimes," he said, "prayer can be very comforting. I wonder if any of you men would like to pray with me." "No," I said. "Why not?" "You wouldn't understand if I told you," I said. "Try me," he said. "I just don't want to pray," I said. "Figure you don't want to make your peace if you're not ready to die?" I smiled. I had to smile. He was right and he knew it. "Something like that." "I know how you feel," he said. "I'm not quite ready to die just yet either." "You ever go into combat?" "Into combat?" "Yes. I've never fired a weapon at anyone, though." "You figure if you don't shoot at anybody, God's gonna take care of you?" Pee-wee asked. "I don't know," he said. "I sure as hell hope so." The big guns in the distance kept rumbling. The sound seemed to rumble through the hills and flatten out over the valley. "If I pray with you, will it keep me alive?" I asked. "No." "What will it do for me?" "I don't know," he said. "I think it can be comforting at times." "You can't say anything better than that?" He shrugged. "You scared being over here?" I asked. "Yeah." He nodded his head. "I'm scared." We got the squad together. We told him some of the things that had happened to us. Then he prayed, asking God to take care of us and our loved ones, things like that. I really appreciated it. Then he started asking God to look out for Brew's soul. That's when Johnson walked away. Right in the middle of a prayer, he walked away. Father Centora looked up at him and he was puzzled. Or at least I think he was puzzled. When the prayer was over, Father Santoro had to split. "Where you going?" Monaco asked. "Some place named Quezon," Father Santoro said. "How come all these places over here have such foreign-sounding names?" Johnson and Dongan got into a pretty heavy argument about how Johnson was keeping the 60. Dongan didn't think the extra barrel that Johnson had to keep was clean enough. Johnson was telling him that he needed a grenade up his ass. They got real close to each other, and Johnson pushed Dongan away from him. Lieutenant Gearhart got Johnson away from Sergeant Dongan and started pushing him toward the HQ hooch. Pee-wee told Johnson that if anything funky went down, that he could count on him. "You can count on me too," I said. I meant it too. The squad didn't need any crap to get us separated. I knew that, and I was sure that Pee-wee did too. But we didn't have to take any crap either. Guard duty. Me, Lobo, Pee-wee, and Sergeant Dongan. He said that he wanted to pull guard to check us out. When he said that, Pee-wee opened his pants and told him to check out his crotch. Sergeant Dongan was from Richmond, Indiana. He sounded Southern, he looked Southern, and he seemed to think Southern. Brunner was sucking up to him as per usual. Johnson outlined the problem. "Me, Pee-wee, Perry, and Monaco is the niggas of this outfit," he said. "We gotta keep a serious watch on our asses." I believed him. Monaco was Italian, but he was the same as the black guys in Dongan's eyes. Maybe because he got along with us so well. I don't know. We went out on guard duty at 2000 hours. It was my first real duty since I had got back to the squad. I hit the guard position and inspected it. It looked okay. It was a foxhole with sandbags around the top and boards at the bottom to stand on. The boards were rickety, but they were better than oozing down into the mud. I lifted the boards and dug it down another foot. Noises. The crickets and creepy crawlies were out in force. Crickets made a terrible racket. Things slithering through the grass could wake up the dead. The moon floating above us scraped against the clouds. Noises. My watch's ticking was louder than my heartbeat. There was something out there. No, it was just the darkness. What was out there was me, fearful, crying in the night. I was afraid. I thought of Father Santoro. A noise. Was it a click? What was it? Another noise. I saw Sergeant Dongan move his right arm. He seemed to be groping about in the darkness. He found something. He swung his arm in a tight arc. A grenade. Thump. It hit. Nothing. It didn't go off. I glanced up. There was movement. What might be a voice. Sergeant Dongan fired a short burst. There was a muffled scream. He fired off a flare. It went high into the air, ignited, then parachuted slowly toward the ground, lighting the entire area. There was one dead VC, a sapper with his wire cutter still in his hand, his lifeless body draped across the wire. I looked around, but I didn't see anything else. Slowly, the light from the flare died. It was dark. The boogeyman could come out again. Minutes passed. An hour passed. We were relieved by a crew of grim-faced ARVN Marines. "What a time for a dud grenade," Lobo said. "Ain't threw no dud," Dongan said. "Threw a damn rock. That gook ducked his head down when he heard it land. Then he wondered why it didn't go off. Stuck his head up and I popped him. Learned that from the 3rd Marines." The man knew what he was doing. He knew how to stay alive. Back at the hooch, Lobo came over and sat on Pee-wee's bunk. Pee-wee said that anybody who sat on his bunk had to give him a kiss. Lobo said he wasn't a faggot, and Pee-wee said he was sorry about that because he could have really used a kiss. "You guys think we're going to have a race problem over here?" Lobo asked. "Not as long as everybody over here got them a gun," Pee-wee said. Lobo stood up. "Well, just in case we do," he said, "I want you to know you got the Jew on your side." "Who's the Jew?" Pee-wee asked. "Me. I'm a Jew." "You ain't no Jew," Pee-wee said. "You too tall." "Fuck you, Pee-wee." "There you go with them promises again," Pee-wee said. The rain stopped. We sat. We did nothing. The war was 1,000,000 miles away. Wallowik told me and Pee-wee that they were talking about progress in the Paris peace talks. "Perry!" Pee-wee was hanging over the edge of his bunk directing traffic for an ant traffic jam. "What?" "You ever have your black ass in Paris?" "No." "Where you been?" "New York." "You know where I been?" "Where?" "Chicago and Petersburg, Virginia. I got me a cousin in Petersburg. We work in a library down there." "What'd he do?" "He run the whole thing." "How we get to do that?" "He just smart as hell," Pee-wee said. A joint operation. Captain Stewart came around to tell us we had to look good because we were going to be working with the Marines. He made it sound like a job. "We'll be going into the Phuoc Ha Valley. The Marine unit will move in first and clear the area," he said. "Then we'll secure it and establish an LZ in the valley. Is that clear?" We didn't do anything. Like half the plans that came down from the regiment, this one was canceled. The Marines had started a counteroffensive up near Khe Sanh and moved up there instead of into the Phuoc Ha Valley. We were glad of that. Damn glad. Lobo tried to get up a volleyball game, but nobody wanted to play. We got Gearhart to requisition some gloves and baseballs from Battalion Supply. We got word that General Westmoreland wanted us to maximize destruction of the enemy. "What the fuck does that mean?" Pee-wee asked. "We get a Kong, we supposed to kill his ass twice?" "No, monkey face. It means that we're supposed to kill as many of these gooks as we can," Brunner said. "You gonna monkey face your way right to Arlington Cemetery," Pee-wee said. Later, lying in the bunk, sweltering in the heat, I wondered what it did mean about maximizing destruction. Would it mean that we would simply kill more? But who would we kill? Maybe we would be quicker to shoot in the hamlets. Maybe we would stop pretending that we knew who the enemy was and let ourselves believe that all the Vietnamese were the enemy. That would be the easy way. The women, the babies, the old men with their rounded backs and thin brown legs. They would be the enemy, all of them. And we would be those who killed the enemy. Okay. I got a letter from Pee-wee's girlfriend. The first thing she told me is that Pee-wee said I'm nice-looking and educated. Then she went on to say how she was sorry she couldn't wait for Pee-wee anymore. Pee-wee wasn't around when I got the letter, so I just burned it. I got a letter from Kenny, too. He said he had a part-time job working at Kelly's Drugs on the corner of Lenox and 118th Street. For some reason, I felt so proud of him that he would do that. I just hoped Mama was letting him keep all the money he made. He also said that he heard that Johnny Robinson got killed in the Nam. Johnny Robinson? The last time I remember seeing him was when we were playing 3-on-3 in Morningside Park. Johnny couldn't play that well, but he always tried hard. I had always thought he was younger than me. I didn't know how he could even be in the Nam. Tuesday. Raining. It promised to be the worst day of the war. We were sitting on the side of the hill. Johnson, Monaco, and Lobo had got some money together, and we were playing poker with some guys from Charlie Company. They called it Charlie Company, but it wasn't really anything more than 3 squads at best. 3 thin squads at that. The ARVNs caught a woman with 2 children coming along the edge of the paddies. They stopped her and started slapping her around. Some guys from Charlie Company stopped them and brought the woman and the 2 kids to the HQ hooch. HQ didn't have an interpreter, and the ARVN interpreter didn't get anything from the woman. They finally let her go. Pee-wee wanted to give the kids the checkerboard he had made. "They probably don't even play checkers over here," Sergeant Dongan said. "No lie," Pee-wee said. "Maybe I'll make them a doll or something." He went over and started grabbing a handful of grass and started making a doll. It was important to him. I could see that, but I didn't know why. He wanted to make those children something, to give them something. I watched as some guys from Charlie Company started talking to the Vietnamese woman. They were just kidding around with her, talking stupid stuff about how they were looking for some cheerleaders. They followed her to the edge of the camp. Meanwhile, Pee-wee was working hard trying to get his little doll together to give to her kids. I watched as Pee-wee stood, putting the last touches on the doll. I thought it was cool when the woman stopped just before she reached the dikes and handed one of the kids to a guy from Charlie Company. The GI's arms and legs flung apart from the impact of the blast. The damn kid had been mined, had exploded in his arms. Guys not even near him, guys who had just been watching him take the kid into his arms, fell to the ground as if the very idea of a kid exploding in your arms had its own power, its own killing force. I saw the woman running across the paddy. I saw her fold backward as the automatic fire ripped her nearly apart. I saw part of her body move in one direction and her legs in another. The woman's other child stood for a long moment, knee-deep in water and mud, before it too was gunned down. I turned and saw Pee-wee walking away. The doll he made lay face down in the endless mud. It was raining again. Chapter 18. Pee-wee skipped his meals the rest of the day. Monaco tried to talk to him, but he wouldn't answer. It was Johnson who finally got him to talk. "Hey, Pee-wee." "What?" "You care anything about these damn kids over here, man?" "They got kids over here?" Pee-wee asked. "Nah, man, all they got is Kongs," Johnson said. "Kongs and mosquitoes." "And rats," Wallowik added. "Yeah." "Hey, Pee-wee," I said. "It's okay to feel bad about what's going on over here, man. It's really okay." "Me feel bad?" Pee-wee turned over in his bunk and pulled his sheet up around his shoulders. "Never happened." The first thing in the morning, a guy got hit. Lobo saw it and told me about it. A medic was handing out malaria pills. The guy had just put the pill into his mouth and was getting water from one of the water cans when he got hit in the rear end. First, the guy turned around because he thought somebody was screwing around with him, Lobo said. Then he felt his ass and looked at his hand. He saw the blood and knew he had been hit. Then he thought that one of us had shot him and he started looking at us. Then another shot hit the water can and we all dove for cover. There was no way to find any VC in the area. A shot would come from the woods and you'd return fire, killing a lot of the vegetation without ever hitting the sniper. If you did hit him, you would know about it. The guy that got hit was a private. Everybody was standing around him congratulating him on his wound. He'd have a chance to get back to Chu Lai for a week or so. And it wasn't a bad hit. It was funny. A guy could get hit, be inches from being killed or crippled for life, and make a joke of it. It was all part of Nam. Some parts you could laugh at, like getting hit in the ass. Other parts, like the kid blowing up, you tried to shut out of your mind. Johnson came over to where I was trying to down some scrambled eggs before the flying bugs got them. What I would do is to wave my fork over the eggs until all the bugs flew away. Then grab a forkful before they came back. Johnson sat down on the ground next to me and watched me for a while. "The officers ain't eating no powdered eggs," Johnson said. "What are they eating?" "Dehydrated potatoes." "How come they get all the good stuff?" "They having a big fight over at HQ Hooch," Johnson said. "What about?" "We supposed to go on a joint patrol with the ARVNs, and the ARVN colonel wants us to get into position first. Captain Stewart wants the ARVNs to go in first." "Stewart told you that?" "Gerhardt." Johnson grunted the name. "He say anything else about Dongan?" "Nothing he can say," Johnson said. "Dongan made them switches too fast. Soon as he got here, he looked around and did his thing. He might know how to keep himself together, but I don't want him doing it by getting me killed." There was something about Johnson that was different than the rest of us. There was a knowing about him, as if he had been here before, as if dying and fighting was something he had been born to. When he talked about Dongan, I listened. "First thing he done was to sit down and have him a beer with Brunner. Then he had him a beer with Wallowik. He don't like Lobel because he think Lobel's a faggot. He even asked me if he was a faggot." It made me feel good to hear Johnson say that. I didn't think he would have said it when he first came into the Army, or even when he first got into the squad. But we had all learned something about dying and about trying to keep each other alive. It was good. "What did you say?" "I didn't say nothing," Johnson said. "I don't talk that shit. A man in Nam fighting by my side is a man fighting by my side. I don't care what he doing in bed." We watched as the guy who had been hit in the rear end came out of the tent. He had a big smile on his face. His boots were unlaced and he was walking with a limp. The medic was just helping him into a Jeep when he got hit a second time. It was another TT hit, on his hand, but this time somebody saw where the fire had come from. A squad went out to look for the sniper. He probably could have stayed in his tree or his hole for the rest of the war without being caught, but he elected to fire on the squad. They pinned him down with automatic fire while the mortar squad set up. It must have cost $10,000 to kill him. "You hear what happened?" Pee-wee's fatigues hung on him loosely. There were dark stains under the arms that were ringed with salt at the edges. "What happened?" Johnson looked at Pee-wee. "The little Viet colonel gave Stewart a direct order to take some damn hill. Stewart said he wasn't going up first and the colonel called division." "Now what's going to happen?" Johnson asked. "Now we going up the damn hill first," Pee-wee said. "What it is," Lieutenant Gerhardt was saying, "is a small hill overlooking a village called Phuoc Ha Tu. There's been activity on the hill, and they want it checked out. The thing is, this colonel is the same one who was leading some ARVN troops that got ambushed along Route 534. Got a whole battalion wasted." "Let's just not go," Pee-wee said. "The vision said we had to go, so we're going," Gerhardt answered. "We're going to call in artillery to soften up the area. Then explore the slopes off the paddies. All we want to do is draw fire if there's any unfriendlies there." Pee-wee wrote down the number of the highway that the ARVN colonel's battalion had been ambushed on and said that he was going to send it to his barber, who took numbers back home, and have him play it for the whole month. "I feel lucky," he said. It was the first time I had seen Pee-wee actually smile since I was back. It was funny that he should smile when we might be going into a firefight. First, we choppered into a hot LZ, and the pilots jerked us out and took us out of there and into the valley itself, which didn't seem hot. We were getting fire support from Tam Key, and there was no response from the hill we were supposed to be moving on to. That didn't mean a damn thing. I had heard stories about artillery fire taking off the entire top of a mountain and then having the Kongs come out of the ground. Their bunkers were deeper than ours. A lot deeper. The new LZ was a makeshift number. We were bunched up pretty good, and I was just praying that we hit the wood line before we got fire. The enemy was close enough for us to hear the sounds of their mortars firing. The rounds were going long, but more important, they weren't detonating. You could hear them whistling overhead, but then there wouldn't be an explosion. We figured it was either defective equipment or the Kong mortar squad didn't know how to arm them. That wouldn't last long. A black lieutenant took Charlie Company to the right of the hill we were supposed to hit, and Lieutenant Gearhart took us to the left. We started advancing in as wide a skirmish line as I had seen, but there was still no return fire. Our squad was on the deep flank, and I was far man. We had to cross a paddy field to get to the wood line that led to the hill we were going to explore. This was why the ARVNs didn't want to go first. The paddy area was at least the size of a football field and exposed. I breathed a little easier when we reached the wood line. Lieutenant Gearhart picked the route with the most cover for us. We went through a heavy canopy area, and the branches scratched my face and ripped at my hands. I was jumping through bushes, hoping I didn't hit any booby traps, avoiding anything that looked like it might be a step easier. I was struggling to keep up. The 2 weeks in the hospital had done a number on me. Just 2 lousy weeks. The M16 felt like 16 pounds instead of 5. Jamal carried the radio, and Gearhart was on it. He gave us the signal to stay put, and I got down behind a fallen tree. Pee-wee crawled over to me. "I got a coin back home," he said. "You go in my room and look in the back of the closet on the floor. You find a sneaker there, and in the sneaker there's a sock with some stuff in it. Most of the stuff ain't worth nothing, but that coin is real old." "Yeah?" "If I don't get out this shit, you go get that coin," Pee-wee said. "My mom's might be a little uptight thinking you trying to rip her off or some shit. But if you gotta buy it from her, you do that. We get out this particular mess, and I'll write her and tell her to save it for you." That's all he said. Then he started crawling back to his position. It meant he had a bad feeling about this place. We heard some light fire on the other side of the mountain. The 60 was stuttering. Once in a while, I thought I heard the M16s, but I couldn't be sure. Some rounds of high explosives came in on top of the hill. I tensed. I looked over to where Lobo was snuggling up to the base of a tree trunk. I gave him the thumbs-up sign, and he returned it. We waited. I checked my watch, and it was 1000 hours. The barrage on the hill stopped. The sounds of a firefight on the other side of the hill picked up. Still, our squad waited. Gearhart was signaling. I looked over at him. He was pointing toward the trees. "Okay, look out for snipers." I tried to make myself smaller. "Don't think. Just be alert." Sergeant Simpson used to say it over and over again. But I was thinking. Gearhart waved his arm in the air. Crap. We started getting up. I had to pee. I'd do it later. I must have had a pee ratio of 3-to-1 in Nam versus the amount of times I had peed in Harlem. We had to move around the base of the hill to another area. Gearhart took us away from the wood line and back toward the paddies. "What the fuck's he doing?" Pee-wee asked. "Trying to draw fire?" Wallowik said. We were showing ourselves, being targets. We moved along the edge of the paddy. The ground was muddy, oozing with water. "Stay away from the dikes," Sergeant Dongan called out. "Keep your distances." I was wearing a flak jacket. Pee-wee had found two and had given me one. It weighed a ton. We kept moving. We kept slipping in the mud. Monaco had pushed forward faster than the rest of us. I think he wanted the point. He hit a dry spot and stopped. He held his rifle over his head and we all stopped. He knelt and then stepped off the dry spot into the paddy. We all followed him into the paddy. When I passed the dry spot, I saw how smooth it looked. Maybe it was too smooth. Maybe it was mined. That's what Monaco must have thought. I thought that if I got killed, I would want it to be over quick. I wanted to be hit and not even realize what was happening. I'd be gone like Lieutenant Carroll. Over, out. I don't want to lay screaming. I don't want to be carried in a medevac chopper while guys you could be home playing ball with were banging on your chest, trying to get your heart beating again. Don't think. The rice paddy seemed forever. The water was up past my ankles and the stink was something else. "Johnson, hit that line of trees," Dongan called out. Johnson held the .60 at his waist. He leaned into it and fired. I saw that he had something on his left hand. It looked like one of those mittens you use to handle hot pots, only it was silver. We kept moving. The rice paddy ended. We were crouched, moving forward toward the wood line again. We hadn't drawn fire. We moved up the hill. It was steep. We slid and fell. I fell and let myself slide backward. I was afraid to catch on to anything. We fired a few shots even though we didn't see anything. We went up 30, 40 meters. Nothing. Gerhardt signaled us to stop. We looked around and found cover. Wait. It was 11:30 hours. We dug in. Charlie had taught us well. We rested. We sat. Gerhardt was on the radio. I tried to read him from where I was. Next to Gerhardt, lying exhausted on the ground, was Jamal. Lobel was sitting against a tree. When I saw him, I froze. His eyes were open, but there was no expression in them. "Lobel," I called to him. "What?" "You okay?" "Yeah." "Shit, I thought you were dead." He smiled. His face was caked with dirt, and the smile showed his teeth. The blank expression in his eyes never changed. We waited until almost 1200 hours before Gerhardt signaled for us to move out. We moved back down the hill. We backed down the best we could. We got to the bottom and then ran the distance back to the paddy. Then we started back through it. It began to rain lightly. The trip back through the paddy went faster than it did the other way. We got away from the paddy and started moving toward the LZ. Stewart was already there when we got there. He was pissed. He told Gerhardt to get over to the command post. Gerhardt glanced toward us and then left. "What was that all about?" Lobel and Wallowik came over to where the rest of the squad was already sitting. "All I know is that Gerhardt got the order to regroup here," Jamal said. "It's my lunchtime," Pee-wee said, "so we had to break." "Check your weapon," Dongan said to Johnson. "It's okay," Johnson said, not moving. "I said check your fucking weapon." Johnson looked up at Dongan and then started stripping the .60. "What makes you such a hot shot?" Monaco asked Dongan. "When you were still pissing your pants, I was kicking ass, kid," Dongan said. "This ain't no fucking war. These slants can't fight. You go up against the Koreans, then you got your damn hands full. We listened to Sergeant Dongan talk about how hard things had been in the Korean War and how tough the Koreans had been. I didn't care. I hadn't been in Korea, and I hadn't been in any other wars. I was in Nam, here and now, and here is where my war was. Gerhardt came back. Brunner, kissing ass as usual, got up from a box he was sitting on so Gerhardt could sit on it. Gerhardt sat on it. I didn't think Lieutenant Carroll would have done that.
The Vietnamese officer, Colonel Hai, has changed his mind, Gerhardt said. Now he wants his men to take the hill.
We was on the damn hill already, Pee Wee said.
That's why Stewart is pissed, Gerhardt said. After we reach the hill without drawing fire, Hai thinks it's safe, so he'll send his men up, then he'll write up his report and take credit for the body count.
What do we do, stay here?
No. We follow them back up the hill,
Gerhardt said. The ARVNs had an ONTOS, an anti-tank weapon that was supposed to lead the way. But there was no way the tracked vehicle was going to get through the mud. And if it did get to the base of the hill, there was no way it was going up the hill through the trees unless somebody chopped out a path for it. At least we didn't have to do that. The ARVNs got into a staging area and started moving out. We sat and watched as what looked like almost a full company of little soldiers moved out. They were bunched too tightly and they were moving too quickly. They left a small headquarters contingent behind as they moved out. Charlie Company moved out after the tail end of the ARVNs, which were mostly mortar teams. We followed Charlie Company. It was 13:20 hours. The first fire came from the flank. 2 squads of ARVNs moved out to suppress it. I don't like it, Dongan said. That's about where we were on the first trip. I bet you got the second over there. He was talking about the 2nd North Vietnamese Regiment. I had heard about them. They had been operating in Quang Ngai and just southeast of Tam Kỳ, but the Marines had beaten them pretty badly. If it was the 2nd Regulars, they would be more disciplined and better armed than the VCs. The flank fire seemed to move the whole battalion toward it and toward the paddies. I didn't want to go through the paddies again.
"Incoming!"
Monaco yelled, and we hit the ground. The mortar shells landed behind us. They were long again, long but walking. They had spotters who saw where the shells were landing and who were directing the fire. They kept shortening up the range to get closer and closer to us, and the shells were coming fast. The noise was terrible. Every time a mortar went off, I jumped. I couldn't help myself. The noise went into you. It touched parts of you that were small and frightened and wanting your mommy. Being away from the fighting had weakened my stamina. It did even more to my nerves. I was shaking. I had to force myself to keep my eyes open. The South Vietnamese ahead of us had just cleared the paddies when the whole damned hill seemed to explode with gunfire. I was 30 meters into the paddies. The shells exploding in the paddies sent water in huge cones into the air. The ARVNs on the far edge of the paddy and those who were trapped in the open space between the paddy and the hill's woodline were being cut down in waves. Some started to come back into the paddy. Others in the paddy were trying to get out to dash across the open space to the woodline.
"Get back! Get back!"
Gerhardt had turned around and crouched over, one hand holding his helmet. We started moving back. The ARVNs around us didn't seem to know what to do. I didn't know what to do either. I slipped in the mud and went straight down. I tried to hold my piece out of the water, but I wasn't sure if I did or not. Then there was fire from our rear. We were trapped in the paddy. I was on my knees, water up to my waist.
"Stay away from the dikes and work back toward the staging area,"
Gerhardt called out. Suddenly, there were jets in the skies above us. I watched one as it dove toward the hill and pulled up just after releasing a bomb. I turned to see the napalm explode and then roll up the hill in a billowing cloud. An ARVN soldier was struggling to keep moving. He had been hit, and the water around him was red with blood. I put my arm under his and lifted him the best I could. Monaco grabbed him by the other side, and we dragged him along. "Keep going! Keep going!" Lieutenant Gerhardt's voice. We reached the wood line and laid the ARVN guy down. A medic came over, looked at him, and pulled him into a sheltered space. "Hit that line!" It was Pee-wee's voice. "Johnson, hit that line!" I turned to see what he was pointing at. There was a row of bushes that almost completely hid the muzzle flashes coming from their midst. Johnson got down in a prone position and started stitching the bushes. We all went down and started firing. There were Kongs on the hill behind us and Kongs to our flanks. We kept moving toward the line of bushes, and I saw some of them moving out. Johnson cut them down as they ran. There were stands of trees every 100 yards or so along the rice paddies leading to the hill. We hit the first stand and fought from tree to tree. I got behind a tree and took clips from my belt. They were wet, and I shook them and blew on them to get the water off. There were hundreds of ARVNs still in the paddies. They were being cut up pretty bad. Many were wounded and screaming. Some of the ARVNs had just stopped where they were and were holding their hands to their heads. They had freaked out completely. Some guys from Charlie Company had tried to get out along the dikes and now lay dead on them. One kept waving his arm in the air. He was still alive. Another guy from Charlie Company started out after him. I turned away and started firing at the wood line. "Move it out! Move it out! We'll get pinned here!" Get pinned? Shit, we were pinned. The wood line was alive with Kongs, but we kept moving toward them. The jet above saw what was going on and came down and raked the wood line. He dropped a bomb that shook the ground. I flinched as the heat from it came over me like a rush. Gerhardt was screaming something. I got up and started moving toward the wood line again. There were 50, maybe 60 meters to the next stand of trees. When I got to it, I went down and pushed along on my belly. I saw Lobo pushing along a few meters from me. The flak jacket caught on everything. I couldn't move with it. I took it off. I felt 100 pounds lighter. We pushed through the wood line until we reached a clearing. The firing stopped. For a few seconds, there was absolute silence, and then everything started up again as heavily as it had been. It was as if somebody had changed channels and then switched back to the war. From the paddies, I could hear the screaming of wounded men, mostly Vietnamese. They cried out in high-pitched voices that sounded almost like cats wailing. We were under cover and held our position. Gerhardt was running by, saw Johnson, and ran to him. He didn't say anything. He just collapsed near him. I saw him feel his chest, and I thought he might have been wounded. Then I saw him pull out a cigarette. His hands were shaking too badly to light the cigarette, and Johnson took it and lit it for him. Gerhardt took a deep draw on the cigarette, then seemed to pull himself together. I looked around for Pee-wee and saw him and Monaco together. They had got another 60 from somewhere and were firing it across the clearing. I looked for the soldier from Charlie Company who had been waving his arm at the dike. I saw him, just his shoulders and an outstretched arm out of the water. Captain Stewart was coming over toward us. Beyond him, I saw guys moving out across the open space. We were getting the hell away from the hill, but I didn't know where we were going. Stewart had blood on his face, but I couldn't see if he was hit or not. Gerhardt waved me over. He told me to keep an eye on Jamal. I said I would. "This is too hot for a dust-off area," Stewart was saying to Gerhardt. "There's a little village down this road. The VC must have it, but their main force is on the hill.
The squad the ARVNs chased went back to the mountain. That the second?
I guess so, Stewart said. But we can't sit out here. We need to get to the village and get picked up from there. We can't hold these positions much longer. Stewart told Charlie Company to move out first, but when he saw what was left of it, he had us all move out together. Jamal had hurt his hand, maybe even broken it, but he was okay except for being winded. We went on a forced march for 10 minutes toward the village. We knew when we reached it as the first men started to fall. The ARVN troops, still not reorganized, caught up with us as we formed a perimeter and tried to get into the village. Some of them ran past us. We watched them get hit and start running back. I was afraid they would start firing on us. Then I saw that many of them had even dropped their weapons. I saw the area that Captain Stewart had been talking about. It would make an iffy dust-off area at best. Choppers could get in and out fairly quickly, but it would be easy for the Kong guns on the hill to hit. Maybe our artillery could keep them quiet. But there was no way the choppers could move in if we didn't take the village. Colonel High finally got what was left of his outfit together and attacked the village. They went on what looked like a suicide charge into the village. As they ran, they began to fall. They fell according to how they were hit. If they were hit in the head, they went backward or whirled around. Sometimes a man hit in the head would go several more stumbling steps before falling. If they were hit in the body, they would just lean forward as if they were reaching for the ground, and then collapse.
Let's go!
We moved out. Johnson and Monaco were behind us, covering us with the 60. They had given the other 60 to an ARVN squad. We ran forward, desperately searching for something to get behind as the bullets whined about us, kicking up dirt and snapping branches. A fresh company of ARVNs had swung around the flank. We were closing in on the village. I was on the ground. I was hurting. My arms and shoulders ached. I loaded another clip and started firing. It was a hamlet, the same thatched roofs, the same smell of burnt bamboo. We fired into the village, trying to chop down anything we could see. Johnson moved the 60 up and got it into place. Monaco loaded again. It was time for the rest of us to get up, to charge again. I was tired, so tired. There was nothing to do but to go on. It came to me that we had the hamlet surrounded, so there was nothing for the Kongs to do but to defend the village. We were here, and they were here. And the only thing to take care of was the dying. I ran on. I saw Pee-wee throwing a grenade. A good idea. I snatched a grenade from my belt and threw it through the window of a hut. Shit. I had forgotten to take the damn pin out. I started firing through the window when I saw the grenade come out. I jumped away, twisting my body as I saw it bounce. It bounced toward me. My hands went up. I tried to turn my chest away. I didn't want to see it, but I couldn't turn away. I looked. It still wasn't armed. I grabbed it and pulled the pin out, arming it. I threw it again. It went through the same window. This time, it exploded. I was on my feet, running toward the hut, firing at nothing, at everything. So tired. I couldn't get my arms up. We went from hut to hut. I wanted to rest, just for a moment. I saw 2 ARVNs and a GI go into a hut, their pieces ready. Another GI was outside. He tossed a grenade through the window. The explosion ripped away a side of the hut. It happened in an instant, a split moment of pain and confusion. A guy had just nailed the 2 ARVNs and the GI who had walked in the door of the hut. In another instant, I swung my rifle toward the soldier who had thrown the grenade. He turned right and moved toward another hut as I lowered my weapon and turned left. A cart, one wheel blasted off, sat in front of a low building that could have been made out of concrete. A soldier sat on the ground, leaning against the wheel. There was an irregular circle of blood spreading over his t-shirt. He seemed to be trying to wipe it away with his hand. We reached the far end of the hamlet. Monaco was in front when we reached the last hut. I caught up with him. Johnson was lugging the 60. We flattened ourselves against the sides of the hut, and then Johnson peppered one side of it with the 60. Monaco took out a cigarette lighter and lit the roof. Damn. Pee-wee. I spun around and looked. Pee-wee was at the far end of the hut toward the wood line trying to get his 16 to work. It had jammed. Me and Monaco went around the side of the hut and saw 2 Kong soldiers trying to pull an American into the bushes. Even when we started firing, they kept pulling him. We went after them. Monaco shot one of them, and the other stood up and threw his arms into the air. At his feet, the soldier, still alive, was moaning in pain. I looked and saw that they had cut his finger off. I looked up into the face of the Kong soldier. He was young, no more than a teenager. He looked scared and tired, the same as me. I squeezed the trigger of the 16 and watched him hurtle backward. Then I sat down on the ground to rest.
Let's go! Let's go! Get the perimeter!
Lieutenant Gerhardt. We need a medic, Pee-wee said, pointing to the wounded soldier.
Okay. The medevac's on its way.
Somehow I managed to get up. Gerhardt went around trying to place guys on the perimeter. It was too much effort to talk. My lips were dry and I was getting cold. I looked over at Monaco. He was sweating. We waited. It was 13:42. I couldn't believe that so little time had passed. The ARVNs set up a perimeter, and we were told that we could rest. Gerhardt said that Sergeant Dongan had been hit. Me and Pee-wee went over to the medical tent. We found Dongan. They had laid his leg next to him. The other leg was barely attached. But it didn't matter now. His mouth was slightly open and the lower jaw twisted.
"One of you guys got a poncho?"
A Black Spec 5 asked. I looked to see if I still had my poncho. I did and gave it to the Spec 5. He picked up the leg and put it on Sergeant Dongan's chest, then wrapped him in the poncho. 10 minutes later, 2 gunships came in and cleared everything from around the village. Above them, I could see the stack of medevac choppers. It was 1400 hours. Chapter 19. The ARVNs were the first to start to move out. Word had come that a 2nd North Vietnamese battalion was moving toward the area. We had to get out and get out quickly. We made as many litters as we could to carry out the wounded. The question came up as to what to do with the dead. Somebody said we should bury them.
"They'll just dig them up," Gerhardt said. "We gotta strip them and burn them."
Hell. Bodies still warm. Limbs that fell as the bodies were moved. Some guys couldn't do it. Some of us had to. We began stripping the Americans. We took their tags, their gear, and took them to a hut. How many were there? There were too many. Everybody took care of their own. We got Dongan and put him in the hut. Some of the bodies were wrapped in ponchos. Some weren't. Guys from Charlie Company saw what we were doing and they got their people in. It was better than having the Kongs get them, maybe mutilating the bodies.
"Make sure you get all the tags,"
Gerhardt was saying. I was afraid of the dead guys. I saw them, arms limp, faces sometimes twisted in anguish, mostly calm, and I was afraid of them. They were me. We wore the same uniform, were the same height, had the same face. They were me, and they were dead. No one looked into the faces, into the often still open eyes. We did what we had to do and turned away. The ARVNs who hadn't already left watched us impassively. They didn't want any part of what we were doing. They left their dead where they were. They stripped them, took the ammo and the supplies. They closed their eyes.
This guy's still alive, man.
Monica was looking at a guy in the middle of a pile. The poncho he had been wrapped in came away from his face. He was unconscious, but he was still breathing. Two guys from Charlie Company who recognized him ran over and started pushing the bodies off him. I watched as the limbs flew off the pile until they reached the guy who was still alive. When they uncovered his body, I could see bubbles of blood coming from a gaping wound in his throat. The flies around the pile, crawling over the bodies, into and out of the wound, buzzed in delight.
Somebody get a medic! Jamal!
Jamal was outside and Monaco got him. Jamal looked at the guy and shook his head. The front of the guy's flak jacket was dark with either sweat or blood. When the sweat mixed with the mud, it was hard to tell. Jamal opened it and saw another wound. The flesh was burned and puffed away from a wound big enough to put a fist into. I looked back at the throat wound. The bubble of blood still rose and fell rhythmically. How was he still alive?
Do something for him!
The guy from Charlie Company's voice was menacing. He's your friend? Jamal asked.
Yeah, he's my friend,
the guy from Charlie Company said. Then you do it, Jamal said. He stood and walked away. A couple of us stood and walked out behind Jamal. A moment later, we heard the shot. We went back in and piled the bodies back up on the guy. They got a flamethrower, and we moved away from the hut. The smell of burning flesh came quickly. I knew the smell wouldn't leave me quickly. Maybe it never would. We started off. I didn't want to look back. I did. The hut was burning furiously.
Who's got the tags?
Gerhardt asked Wallowik. Wallowik turned and looked at him. His lips were swollen, one side of his face was puffed. There was blood in the corner of his mouth. He didn't answer Gerhardt. A guy from Charlie Company pointed to another guy from Charlie Company who was supposed to have the tags, and Gerhardt went over to him. Then he came back.
He forgot the tags, Gerhardt said. He left them in the hut.
How they gonna let their folks know they dead? Pee-wee said. Gerhardt didn't answer. What would they do for a body? Would they send home an empty coffin? Would they scrounge pieces from graves registration? What would they say to their parents, their wives? We lost your son, ma'am. Somewhere in the forests he lies, perhaps behind some rock, some tree. We burned his body, ma'am. In a rite hurried by fear and panic, we burned what was left of him and ran for our own lives. Yes, and we're sorry. Perhaps they would tell them nothing. Not having a body in hand, not having the lifeless form to send with the flag, they would not acknowledge that there was a death at all. Yes, and we're sorry. The ARVNs were up ahead of us, pushing through the woods. They were moving quickly. I looked for Pee-wee and found him. He was behind Gerhardt. Gerhardt had his head up. His flak jacket was open. We went quickly, stumbling, but somehow in control of ourselves. We were looking out for each other, checking each other out. I stayed with Jamal mostly. I asked how he was doing. I don't believe I'm not dead, he said. You know I'm not made for this kind of life. The ARVNs were headed for the same pickup zone we were. They cut down along the edge of the paddies, and we took a longer route through the wood line. The branches ripped at us. Vines caught our feet. It was like a nightmare. The forest itself was our enemy, trying to catch us, trying to hold us in its grip. Small arms fire. The ARVNs were under fire. We dove for cover.
Get up! Get up! Keep moving!
The voice came from behind us. I saw Captain Stewart look back to see who was talking. I turned. It was Johnson.
Stay down!
Captain Stewart barked out his order.
Look for the sniper! Let's move it!
Johnson started forward.
I said stay down, damn it!
Stewart yelled. I was on my feet. Monica was up. We were moving again, following Johnson. The hell with Stewart. We broke through the underbrush. We kept moving. I looked around. Stewart was coming too. Suddenly, I wasn't there. It was as if I were out of my body and looking down at us. And then I was back. What the hell was going on? I shook my head. Everything seemed okay again. We kept moving. I hoped like hell that somebody knew where we were going. Monaco was up ahead. He held his hand up, and we dropped where we were. I could feel my heart beating in my temples. I was gasping for air, sucking in tiny fleets of flying bugs, spitting them out, sucking in another fleet. Movement to my right. We were moving again. Pee-wee was trying to get Jamal up. I went over to them. He hit? No, Pee-wee said. Jamal was shaking. Tears were running down his face. He was ugly. God, a man could be ugly when he cried. Pee-wee punched him in the face and started pulling him up. I got his other arm and started pulling him up. Gearhart was over. He jerked Jamal by the collar.
Move it, soldier!
He spat the words in Jamal's face. Jamal was moving again. He was okay. He was one of us again. Suddenly, I wasn't there. There was somebody running in my boots, but it wasn't me. The legs moved mechanically. The weapon stayed in front of the body. I could almost see myself running. I could feel myself running, but it wasn't me running. What the hell was going on? I stopped.
Move it, Perry!
Gearhart's voice. The ground was passing me faster, but it wasn't me running. It was someone else, perhaps even something else. It was a body moving through a nightmare in which everything knew everything, where the ground pushed your feet away and the vines clutched at your legs while the trees chortled and shook with silent laughter. We stopped. The sweat was cold against my body. Up ahead, Monaco was sitting with his back to a tree. His chest was heaving. He gave hand signals. Gearhart moved up. Johnson moved up. Where did they get the strength? I looked at Pee-wee. Pee-wee, my main man. Pee-wee's face was dark. There were shadows where his eyes should have been. The shadows moved. Pee-wee moved. He was getting up. I didn't want to get up. I wanted to sit there forever. Where the hell was the popcorn machine? Couldn't I just watch the rest of this damn war? Couldn't I just be out of it for a few hours, a few minutes? We moved up. There were voices, Vietnamese. We moved up. The soft pop-pops of the grenade launchers went off. There was screaming, high-pitched whines that died slowly as the life drained from the body. We pushed up. There was a clearing and nearly a platoon of NVAs. We had them in the open. I couldn't believe it. We fired as they started scrambling away. Suddenly, I wasn't there. There was a sight in front of me, and I stared at bodies trying to move across an open field. There was the sensation of vibration in my hands, against my face, and the distant sound of an M16 firing. I felt a shoulder moving, perhaps mine, reversing clips I had taped together. There were soldiers trying to move away from the forward sights of a 16. They weren't moving nearly fast enough.
Get the perimeter,
Captain Stewart again.
You two men get to the other side of this clearing. The 60 will cover you. Never happened.
Pee-wee dug in.
Soldier!
Captain Stewart swung a .45 on Pee-wee. I didn't see the 60 move. I heard the impact of the bullets in the ground in front of Captain Stewart's feet. I saw him leap backward. I saw him dive for cover. The .45 went back into its case. I looked over my shoulder. Johnson was on his knees, a menacing silhouette. The .60 swung toward the clearing and raked the far side. Suddenly, a figure popped out of the underbrush carrying a tube. "Get him! Get him!" The .60 barked. The figure started at first to collapse and then to expand. It was as if it drew in on itself, gathered the momentum it needed, and then began to grow. The arms flung apart, but it had already fired the RPG. Down, sweet Jesus, please. Dirt all over me. There was more firing. I looked up. There was something near me. It was flesh. I pushed it away. I wanted to get away from it. I stood and started to run from it. The ARVNs were on the left. I saw them. I fired in their direction. I don't know why. I stopped and tried to pull myself together. The Charlies were still ahead of us. They had backed themselves into a tight knot in the middle of the field. There must have been 60, maybe 70 of them. We fired at them and fired at them and fired at them. Bodies once alive, then lifeless, seemed to live again as the bullets tore into the dead flesh and made it dance in the afternoon sun. I breathed in some bugs without bothering to spit them out. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" Gerhardt. The other side of the clearing was burning. The sudden darkness of a jet surprised me, surprised all of us. One guy opened up. The jet roared and dropped a bomb just over the clearing. Napalm. It burst into the trees, rolling, rushing, a gale of fire through the trees. Couldn't breathe. I went down. Guys were dropping around me as the heat from the napalm sucked up the air. The trees above us caught fire. My skin was full of tiny pinpricks. The napalm was too close. We started moving into the clearing. A Kong, maybe the one who had fired the RPG, was lying on top of a pile of bodies. His chest and stomach were open. There were tubes and organs and the redness of working parts that no longer worked. "Perry!" It was Pee-wee. "What?" He pointed. I looked. It was a soldier. He had been white, round-faced. Now the bottom of one leg was off. Most of the flesh from the thigh was off, too. The white, twisted bone angled out oddly from the hip. His eyes were open. His mouth was open as wide as it would go, the teeth bared. "Look at his hands, man." The hands were around the neck of an NVA soldier. There were no other wounds on the NVA. The GI had killed him from the other side of death. I walked away. People were not supposed to be made like that. People were not supposed to be twisted bone in tubes that popped out at crazy kids' toys' ankles. People were supposed to be sitting and talking and doing. Yes, doing. Chapter 20. When the ARVN troops first reached us, we didn't notice anything unusual. Then we heard one of their officers yelling and motioning for us to move back toward the hamlet. "What the hell is this?" Pee-wee reached for his rifle. Gerhardt saw that the ARVN troops were surrounding us. I almost freaked out. I thought the ARVN troops must have been Kongs in disguise. "What the fuck is this all about?" Gerhardt was asking. Then we saw. The chopper started down. The ARVN officer simply wanted to get out first. "Put your hands up! Put your hands up!" Gerhardt shouted. He threw down his weapon and put his hands high over his head. Pee-wee lifted the muzzle of his rifle.
"No, put your hands up high," Gerhardt shouted. "Like this."
He put his hands up even higher. We finally figured out what Gerhardt had in mind and put our hands up. He was letting the guys in the choppers know what was up. The door gunners on the choppers opened up on the knot of ARVNs behind us. We got our pieces and started firing into them. They broke it off quickly and moved away. We started scrambling to the choppers, fighting off any ARVNs that tried to get on before us. The chopper I was trying to get on dipped down and almost knocked me off. Then it seemed to leap into the air with me hanging onto one side. Somebody pulled me in. I felt something slip by me, clutch at my ass, my leg, hold onto my ankle for a long second, and then let it go. I thought my ankle was broken. I twisted to see who was behind me. There was nobody. Nothing but the empty space of the door. Somebody had fallen out. It was forever getting back to the base. We were jumbled over each other, our bodies aching and too tired to move. We got to the base and somebody came up with some coffee. I had never been a coffee drinker in the world, but now I wanted it. Now I needed it, anything that promised to get me to the next minute. Gerhardt told us to get some rest.
"Sleep,"
he said. Sleep. Rest. The words had lost their meaning. Trying to reach sleep, any kind of real sleep, was hard. It was as if I just faded out sometimes and then faded back in when we got called. Most of it wasn't rest either. You had to be away from the boonies for 3, maybe 4 days before you felt rested. It wasn't so much the running around or the fighting. It was the tension. Monaco's screaming woke me with a start. I jumped up, reaching for my rifle.
"There they are! There they are!"
he was screaming. He fell to the floor and shot a burst toward the door of the hooch.
"Cease fire! Cease fire!"
Wallowik was yelling. Lobel and Johnson jumped on Monaco and wrestled his weapon away from him. I was behind my bunk looking toward the door.
"Be cool! Be cool!"
Johnson called out.
"Oh, God!"
Monaco had his hands to his head. They were helping him up.
"What the fuck is going on?"
I looked toward Pee-wee, who was standing flat against the wall.
"I swore I thought I saw some Kongs dragging a guy through the bushes," Monaco said. "I saw it just as plain as anything."
"You were probably dreaming," I said, getting up from the floor.
"No, man, I was awake," Monaco said. "I saw these 2 Kongs dragging a guy into the bushes."
Monaco shook his head and sat down on his bunk. Everybody else cooled out. Some guys from another squad came over to find out what the shooting was about, and Wallowik told them a guy was working on his rifle and it went off. When they saw that Monaco was okay, Lobel and Brunner walked him over to the mess tent to get some coffee. "Hey, Perry," Wallowik said on the edge of the bunk.
"What?"
"You know what happened to Monaco?"
"No. What?"
"I mean, you know what he just did? Thought he was seeing something he had seen before?"
"Yeah?"
"That happened to me once," he said. "I was on guard and some VC tried to get through the barbed wire. We were firing on them, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw one that had already got through. He came at me and I turned and got him, and then I went back to firing on the other guys trying to get through. We stopped them, and I didn't think much of it. But the next day I was playing volleyball, and just as I turned..." Wallowik paused as if he were trying to remember exactly what had happened. "You thought you saw guys coming through the wire again?" "No, not coming through the wire," he said. "I thought I saw the guy that had broken through. I screamed and dove for the ground. It was pretty embarrassing. It's understandable, though." You understand it?
No.
This ends Disc 6.